Take this and go fix that burden in your belly. My mother-in-law spat, hurling a wad of bills at my chest. It was exactly $100. The heavy oak door slammed, severing my past and leaving me shivering in the merciless Chicago winter. She thought casting a pregnant widow into the snow would break me, but she made a fatal error. I would not just survive, I would burn down hell itself to uncover the truth about my husband. My name is Elise Marquette. Standing in the center of the grand ballroom at the Blackwood Manor, I felt less like a widow and more like an exhibit in a museum of tragedies. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old money, a suffocating blend that did nothing to mask the stench of betrayal that would soon permeate every corner of this house. I smoothed the black fabric of my dress over my stomach, a protective gesture that had become second nature over the last 5 months. The funeral of Julian Vance, heir to the Vance tech empire, was exactly what everyone expected it to be. It was opulent, cold, and entirely devoid of the warmth that had defined the man himself. Hundreds of people filled the room, holding crystal flutes of champagne, murmuring condolences that felt as hollow as the casket we had lowered into the ground 2 hours ago. They were not here for Julian. They were here to see who would inherit the throne. They were here to see if the rumors were true, if the landscape architect from the wrong side of Chicago had truly managed to secure the keys to the kingdom. I looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, but found only calculating eyes. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been only 2 years, that Julian had walked into the botanical garden I had designed for the city. I was on my knees in the dirt, planting hydrangeas, dirt under my fingernails, and sweat on my brow. He had stopped, not to criticize the disruption to his morning walk, but to ask me the Latin name of the flower. He did not care about my bank account or my lack of pedigree. He loved that I could build things, that I could nurture life from the barren earth. We fell in love with the reckless speed of 2 people who knew, deep down, that time was a luxury we might not be able to afford. But time had run out faster than either of us could have imagined. 5 days ago, the call had come, a yacht explosion off the coast of Italy, a malfunction in the fuel line. They said, the authorities told me there was nothing left to bury. The identification had been made through DNA records. Just like that, the man who had kissed my forehead before leaving for the airport. Promising to be back in time for our second ultrasound was reduced to a percentage on a coroner's report. 99.9% match. A sharp clinking of a spoon against a glass cut through the murmur of the crowd. The room fell silent. I turned to see Victoria Vance standing by the fireplace, my mother-in-law. She was a striking woman, always impeccable in her appearance. Wearing a black dress that cost more than my father had made in 10 years, her eyes, cold and gray like steel, locked onto mine. She had never accepted me. To her, I was a gold digger, a parasite that had attached itself to her golden boy. She had tolerated me while Julian was alive because she had no choice. But now, the shield is gone. Thank you all for coming, Victoria said, her voice smooth and practiced. Julian would have been touched by this outpouring of love. She did not look touched. She looked ready for war. However, she continued, her gaze never leaving my face, grief has a way of revealing the truth, and we have business to attend to. Mr. Henderson, if you please. The family lawyer, a nervous man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, stepped forward. He cleared his throat. We are here to read the last will and testament of Julian Vance. A ripple of surprise went through the room. Wills were usually read in private offices. Behind closed doors, doing this here, in front of the board of directors and the social elite of Chicago, was a calculated move. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Julian Vance, Mr. Henderson read, his hands shaking slightly. Being of sound mind, do hereby leave 100% of my assets, including my majority shares in Vance Tech and the Blackwood estate, to my beloved wife, Elise Marquette Vance, and our unborn child. The silence that followed was deafening. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Julian had protected us, even in death. He was looking out for me. "Objection," Victoria said calmly. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Henderson stammered. "The document is legally binding." "Not if the beneficiary has violated the morality clause inherent in the Vance family trust," Victoria said. Reaching into her clutch, she pulled out a brown envelope and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of me. It landed with a heavy thud. "And not if the unborn child is not a Vance." The room erupted in whispers. My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Open it," Victoria commanded. I reached for the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, grainy, blurry, but clear enough to tell a story. A story that was a complete lie. There were pictures of me, seemingly intimate with a man I did not recognize, dated 3 weeks ago when Julian was out of town. There were medical documents, forged with terrifying precision, claiming my pregnancy dates did not align with Julian's presence. "These are fake," I whispered, dropping the photos as if they burned. "I have never seen this man. This is insane. Julian is the father." "Is he?" Victoria sneered, abandoning her facade of grace. "The timeline suggests otherwise, and according to the family trust, any spouse found guilty of infidelity is immediately stripped of all inheritance. Furthermore, we have petitioned the court for an emergency freeze on all assets pending a paternity test, which, given that Julian is cremated, will be quite difficult to prove in your favor without my cooperation." "You cannot do this," I said, looking around the room for help. "Someone, please, this is a lie." But the guests, the board members, the so-called friends, they all looked away. They knew where the power lay now. Julian was dead. Victoria was the queen, and I was the usurper to be executed. "I have already spoken to the judge," Victoria said, signaling to the security guards standing by the doors. "The eviction notice is effective immediately. You are trespassing. Miss Marquette, I suggest you leave before I have you arrested." "This is my home," I cried, clutching my stomach. "I am carrying your grandchild." "I have no grandchild," Victoria spat. "I only have the bastard of a lying whore." 2 security guards stepped forward. Grabbing my arms, I struggled, but I was weak from days of crying and not eating. They dragged me toward the front door, my heels scraping against the polished marble floor. "Get your hands off me," I screamed, panic rising in my throat. "My coat! It is freezing outside." They did not listen. They hauled me through the foyer, past the portraits of Julian's ancestors who seemed to glare down at me in judgment. The heavy oak doors were thrown open, and the biting wind of the Chicago winter slammed into me. It was a blizzard outside, the temperature well below 0. I was thrown onto the steps. I stumbled, barely catching myself before I fell onto the ice. The cold was instant and paralyzing. I was wearing a thin black funeral dress. I had no coat, no purse, no phone. "Wait!" Victoria's voice cut through the wind. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a thick fur coat. She looked down at me with pure disgust. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a wad of cash and a small business card. "I am not a monster," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "I will not let you starve on the street tonight." She threw the money at me. The bills fluttered in the wind, scattering over the snow. I looked down. It was exactly $100. "And take this," she said, flicking the card at my face. It landed in the snow by my knee. "Go to this address. Get rid of that burden in your belly. Fix your mistake. Once the thing is gone, you leave this city, if I ever see your face in Chicago again. Or if you try to fight me for the estate, I will make sure you disappear just like your husband." "Get rid of it?" I gasped, shielding my stomach from the snow. "This is Julian's baby." "It is a mistake," she hissed. "And I erase mistakes." With that, she turned on her heel. The heavy doors slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent, snowy night. The lock clicked, sealing my past life away forever. I was alone. I scrambled to gather the bills before the wind blew them away. $100. That was the price she put on my life. I picked up the card. It was plain white with a handwritten address in a part of the city. Decent people avoided. A clinic. A place to make problems go away. The cold was biting into my skin, turning my fingers blue. I could not stay here. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking violently. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to preserve whatever heat I had left for the baby. "It is okay," I whispered to the life inside me, my teeth chattering. "Mommy is here. I will not let them hurt you." I began to walk. The driveway of the Blackwood Manor was a mile long. The snow was already 6 inches deep and falling fast. Every step was a battle. The wind whipped my hair into my face, blinding me. I was a landscape architect. I knew nature. I knew that in this weather, hypothermia could set in within 20 minutes without proper clothing. I had to find shelter. I reached the main road, the iron gates of the estate looming behind me like the gates of hell. There was a bus stop a few hundred yards down the road. I trudged toward it, my feet numb, my vision blurring. Cars drove past, their headlights cutting through the snow, but no one stopped for the woman in the black dress stumbling along the highway. To them, I was just a shadow, a ghost in the storm. I reached the bus shelter. It was nothing more than a plastic bench with a glass roof, offering little protection from the wind. I collapsed onto the bench, curling into a ball. I pulled my knees to my chest, creating a small cocoon for my baby. I checked the schedule posted on the wall. The next bus into the city was due in 45 minutes. 45 minutes. It felt like an eternity. I looked at the crumpled bills in my hand and the card Victoria had thrown at me. "Get rid of it." Her words replayed in my mind, fueling a fire in my chest that the snow could not extinguish. She wanted me to give up. She wanted me to kill the last part of Julian that existed in this world. She thought that by stripping me of my home, my money, and my dignity, she could break me. She was wrong. I pressed my frozen hand against my stomach, feeling a faint flutter, a kick. My baby was alive. My baby was fighting. "I promise you," I whispered into the howling wind, my voice cracking but firm. "I promise you, little one, we will survive this. I do not know how, and I do not know where we will go, but she will not win. I will burn down her entire world before I let her touch you." Tears froze on my cheeks. I sat there, a destitute widow in a blizzard, clutching $100 and a death sentence for my child. But as the headlights of the approaching bus finally cut through the darkness, I knew one thing for certain. Elise Vance, the gentle gardener, had died in that mansion tonight. The woman who boarded that bus was someone else entirely, and she was ready to set the world on fire. The next 3 days were a blur of gray ceilings, the smell of industrial bleach, and the hollow ache of a stomach that had forgotten the sensation of being full. The descent from the penthouse to the pavement was not a slide. It was a free fall that shattered every bone of dignity I had left. I found myself at a shelter called St. Jude's, a place where hope went to rot in the corners of a dormitory that smelled of unwashed bodies and despair. I had curled up on a cot that felt more like a slab of concrete than a bed. Clutching my purse to my chest like a lifeline, it contained the $100 Victoria had thrown at me and my driver's license, the only proof that Elise Vance existed. But exhaustion is a thief that does not bargain. Sometime during the second night, while I drifted into a nightmare where Julian was reaching for me from a burning boat, the thief struck. When I woke, my arms were empty. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the fog of sleep. I scrambled off the cot, tearing through the thin blanket, searching the floor. Gone. My purse, my money, my identity. I ran to the volunteer at the front desk, a woman with tired eyes who looked at me with pity but no surprise. She told me there were no cameras in the dorms. She told me this happened all the time. She told me I should be grateful I still had my coat. I walked out into the Chicago morning, and for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be invisible. Without an ID, I could not access my bank accounts even if Victoria had not frozen them. without money. I could not eat. I was a ghost haunting a city that I had once helped design. By the third afternoon, the hunger had stopped being a sharp pain and had turned into a dull, constant nausea. But worse than the hunger was the cramping. It started low in my abdomen, a tightening that made me gasp for air as I trudged through the slush on State Street. Fear paralyzed me. It was too early. The stress, the cold, the lack of food. My body was failing the one task I had left. I reached into the pocket of my coat, my fingers brushing against the only thing the thief had missed, the white card Victoria had thrown into the snow. The clinic. Get rid of it. The thought whispered through my mind, seductive and terrifying. If I did what she wanted, the pain would stop. I could leave. I could start over. I could be warm. I leaned against a brick wall, watching the happy families walking by with their shopping bags, oblivious to the woman dying on the sidewalk. For a split second, just a heartbeat. I considered it. I considered surrendering. Then, the baby kicked. It was a strong, defiant thump against my ribs, a reminder that I was not alone. Tears froze on my lashes. I was not going to that clinic to kill my child. I was going to beg. I would beg for progesterone. I would beg for a checkup. I would beg for mercy. The address on the card led me away from the skyscrapers and the manicured parks I loved, down into the veins of the city where the blood ran dark. The neighborhood was a graveyard of industry. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth, and the wind howled through abandoned factories. The clinic sat wedged between a liquor store and a pawn shop, its neon sign buzzing with a dying insect sound. The Sanctuary Women's Health. The name was a cruel joke. I pushed open the door, a bell jingling cheerfully above my head, a stark contrast to the gloom inside. The waiting room was small and suffocatingly hot. The linoleum floor was scuffed and stained with years of muddy boots. 3 other women sat in plastic chairs, their heads bowed, their eyes fixed on the floor. They looked like they were waiting for a sentencing, not a doctor. I approached the reception desk behind a wall of bulletproof glass. The woman behind it did not look up from her magazine. "I need to see a doctor," I rasped, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Please, I have no money, but I am in pain. I think something is wrong with the baby." The woman looked up, popping her gum. Her eyes scanned my disheveled hair, my expensive but dirty coat, and the dark circles under my eyes. "Doctor, Thorne is the only one in today. He is with a patient. Sit and wait." "I have this card," I said, sliding Victoria's card through the slot. The woman glanced at it, and her expression shifted slightly. "Reference patient? Okay, he will see you next." I sat in the corner, wrapping my arms around my belly, rocking back and forth to manage the waves of cramping. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, a heavy metal door opened, and a young girl walked out, wiping tears from her face. "Next!" a deep voice called out. I forced myself to stand and walked through the door. The examination room was a shock. I expected grime, rusty tools, a reflection of the decay outside. Instead, the room was pristine. Stainless steel gleamed under bright, sterile lights. The equipment looked modern, perhaps even more advanced than what I had seen at the private hospital Julian and I used to visit. And then there was the man standing by the sink, washing his hands. Doctor. Elias Thorne did not belong here. He was a tall man, perhaps in his late 50s. With silver hair swept back impeccably, he wore a tailored suit under his white lab coat, and on his wrist sat a watch that I recognized as a limited edition timepiece worth more than this entire building. He turned to face me, drying his hands with a deliberate, graceful motion. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and unreadable. "Sit on the table, please," he said. His voice was calm, commanding, devoid of the harshness I had encountered everywhere else in this neighborhood. I climbed onto the paper-covered table, my hands trembling. "Doctor, please, I am not here for what the card says. I want to keep my baby, but I'm having cramps. I have not eaten in 3 days. I am scared I am losing him." Thorne paused. He looked at me, really looked at me. For a long moment. Then, he walked over to a counter where a tablet was propped up. On the screen, a news headline flashed. Widow of Vance heir caught in cheating scandal. DNA test pending. My face, from a photo taken at a gala 2 months ago, was plastered next to the headline. Elise Vance, he said softly. It was not a question. I shrank back. Please, it is all a lie. Victoria made it all up. I never cheated on Julian. I expected him to sneer. I expected him to throw me out or call the police. I braced myself for the humiliation. Instead, Doctor. Thorne pulled a stool over and sat down in front of me. His expression softened, the professional mask slipping just enough to reveal something that looked like sorrow. Lie back, Elise, he said gently. Let us see how the little one is doing. I lay back, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes. He applied the cold gel to my stomach. His hands were steady and surprisingly warm. He moved the transducer over my skin. His eyes fixed on the monitor. The room filled with a sound that stopped my heart and then started it again. Stronger than before. Whoosh, 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 the heartbeat, fast, rhythmic, and furious. There, Thorne said, pointing to the screen. Do you see that? I looked at the grainy black and white image, sobbing openly now. Is he okay? The cramping is likely due to stress and malnutrition, Thorne said, wiping the gel from my stomach with a soft towel. But the heartbeat is strong, remarkable. Actually, this child is a fighter, just like his father. I froze. The room went dead silent. I pushed myself up on my elbows, staring at him. You knew Julian? Thorne stood up and walked to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. His posture was tense now, alert. I did not just know him. Elise, I owed him my life, years ago, before he took over Vance Tech. Julian pulled me out of a situation that would have buried me. He was a good man in a world of sharks. But why are you here? I asked, looking around the room. In this place? Penance, Thorne said cryptically. And preparation. He turned back to me, his face serious. Listen to me closely. You cannot go out the front door. What? Why? Because there is a black SUV parked across the street. 2 men are inside. They work for Victoria Vance. They are not here to give you a ride home. They are here to ensure you do not leave this clinic still pregnant. My blood ran cold. She sent people to watch me? She leaves nothing to chance, Thorne said. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of vitamins and a protein bar. He handed them to me. Eat this, now. I tore open the wrapper. My hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I devoured the bar in 3 bites, the taste of chocolate and peanut butter overwhelming my starved senses. Victoria thinks you are weak, Thorne said, moving to the door and locking it. She thinks that by stripping you of your money, she strips you of your power. She expects you to walk out of here broken, empty, and obedient. He walked to the back of the room and pushed aside a heavy metal shelving unit. Behind it was a hidden door. But we are going to disappoint her, he said. He grabbed a heavy wool coat from a hook, a man's coat, and draped it over my shoulders. It smelled of antiseptic and expensive cologne. Where are you taking me? I asked, sliding off the table, my legs feeling steadier than they had in days. Somewhere safe, Thorne replied. Somewhere her eyes cannot reach. He guided me into the dark corridor behind the hidden door. The air was cold and damp. I hesitated, looking back at the sterile room, at the man I had just met. Trust was a dangerous currency, and I had been bankrupt of it since Julian died. Why are you helping me? I whispered. If she finds out. Let her find out, Thorne said, his voice hard as stone. I have been waiting for this war for a long time. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. You must not give up on this child. Elise, he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that burned. And you need to know the truth. The explosion on the yacht, the report said it was an engine malfunction. Yes, I breathed. It was not, Thorne said. pushing the door open to the alleyway where the snow fell silently on the trash cans. Julian was an expert sailor. He checked that engine himself 2 hours before departure. Someone rigged it to blow. The death of your husband was not an accident. Elise, it was an execution. The wind hit me, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt a fire igniting in my veins. Fueled by his words, Julian was murdered, and the woman who ordered it was likely sitting in my house, drinking my wine. "Come," Thorne said, gesturing to a nondescript sedan waiting in the shadows of the alley. "We have a lot of work to do." I stepped into the snow, leaving the old Elise Marquette behind in that clinic. The woman who stepped into the car was no longer just a widow. She was a witness, and she was coming for them all. The sedan moved through the night like a sleek, black shark swimming through deep water. We had left the decaying industrial veins of Chicago hours ago, trading the gray slush of the city for the pristine, untouched white of the mountains. I sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in the heavy wool coat that smelled of sandalwood and antiseptic, watching the headlights cut through the falling snow. Beside me, Doctor. Elias Thorne drove with a terrifying precision. He did not speak. He did not turn on the radio. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thumping of the wipers fighting the blizzard. We turned off the main highway onto a private road that snaked its way up the side of a mountain. Tall pines, heavy with snow, crowded the narrow asphalt. Standing like silent sentinels, after 20 minutes of climbing, we reached a massive iron gate. Thorne rolled down his window. A guard, dressed in tactical gear and holding an assault rifle across his chest, stepped out of a booth. He shone a flashlight into the car, the beam blinding me for a second. Before nodding at Thorne, the gates groaned open. This was not a house. It was a fortress. The structure loomed ahead, a sprawling masterpiece of glass, steel, and dark wood that seemed to grow directly out of the cliff face. It was beautiful, but it was aggressive. It looked like it was designed to withstand a siege. Thorne pulled up to the main entrance, killed the engine, and turned to me. The dashboard lights cast long shadows across his face, making his eyes look like deep, dark pools. "Welcome to the summit," he said. "You are safe here. Elise, no one enters these grounds without my permission. Not the press, not the police, and certainly not Victoria Vance." Inside, the air was warm and smelled of cedar and lavender. It was a jarring transition from the freezing cold outside. Thorne led me through a foyer with ceilings that seemed to reach the sky, down a long hallway lined with abstract art, and into a guest suite that was larger than the entire apartment I had shared with Julian. A fire was already crackling in the stone hearth. A tray of food, steaming vegetable soup, fresh bread, and tea, sat on a small table. "Eat," Thorne commanded gently, "then sleep. We have much to discuss. But you are running on fumes." I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to demand answers about the execution he had mentioned in the alley, but my body betrayed me. The moment the hot soup touched my tongue, I realized I was starving. I ate with a desperation that embarrassed me, scraping the bowl clean. Afterward, I collapsed onto the bed. The sheets were high-thread count Egyptian cotton, soft against my skin. I fell into a sleep so deep it felt like a coma. When I woke, the room was filled with the gray light of a winter morning. My clothes, the dirty funeral dress, were gone, replaced by a set of soft cashmere loungewear folded neatly on the chair. I changed, feeling cleaner, warmer, but no less confused. There was a knock on the door. Thorne entered. He had changed out of his suit into a dark turtleneck and slacks, looking less like a doctor and more like the lord of a manor. "Come with me," he said. I followed him. We walked deeper into the house, past rooms that looked like libraries and studies. The silence here was heavy, oppressive. It was too quiet. There were no servants, no cleaning staff, just the low hum of the heating system. We reached a heavy steel door at the end of the west wing. Thorne placed his hand on a biometric scanner, the lock clicked, and the door hissed open. The air on the other side was different. It smelled of ozone and rubbing alcohol. The lighting changed from warm yellow to a sterile, clinical white. "Where are we?" I asked, hugging my arms around myself. "This is my private research facility," Thorne said, walking ahead. "I treat patients here who require absolute discretion, high-profile individuals, diplomats, and people who need to disappear." He stopped in front of a large observation window. Beyond the glass was a room filled with advanced medical equipment. Monitors beeped in a steady, rhythmic cadence. Ventilators hissed. In the center of the room, surrounded by a forest of IV stands and wires, lay a bed. And in the bed, there was a man. He was bandaged almost from head to toe. His legs were elevated. A tube ran down his throat. His face was obscured by gauze and a breathing mask. "Who is that?" I whispered, a strange dread pooling in my stomach. Thorne turned to me. His expression was grave. "Elise, you need to listen to me very carefully. What I am about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about the last 5 days." He took a step closer, forcing me to look him in the eye. "The body they buried yesterday," Thorne said slowly. "The body in the casket. It was not Julian." The world tilted on its axis. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. "What? That is impossible." "The DNA, the police report." "Fabricated," Thorne cut in. "Or, to be more precise, swapped. The body belonged to a deckhand, a tragic casualty." "Yes, but necessary to sell the narrative." "Narrative?" I choked out. "My husband is dead. I saw the report." "Julian is not dead," Thorne said. He pointed through the glass at the broken figure in the bed. "He is right there." I stared at the man in the bed. It couldn't be. It was just a shape, a collection of broken bones and bandages. I shook my head violently. "No, you are lying. Why would you lie to me?" "I am not lying," Thorne said, his voice calm, anchoring me as I spiraled. "Think, Elise, why did Julian go to Italy? He told you it was a routine inspection of the new acquisition, but Julian was terrified before he left. Did you not notice? The late-night calls? The way he checked the locks 3 times? I stopped. I remembered. 2 weeks before the trip, Julian had been jumpy. He had installed a new security system in our apartment. He had made me promise to always keep my location on. He was in trouble, Thorne explained. Serious trouble. Julian had stumbled upon a massive money laundering scheme within the European subsidiary of a rival conglomerate, a shadow organization, financial mafia. They knew he had the evidence. They gave him a choice: return the files and die, or keep the files and watch his wife and unborn child be tortured to death. I covered my mouth with my hand, a sob trapping itself in my throat. "He came to me," Thorne continued. "He knew I had resources. He knew I could make people disappear. We devised a plan. The yacht explosion was staged. We needed the world, and specifically the people hunting him, to believe he was dead. It was the only way to take the target off your back. But..." I looked at the man in the bed again. If it was staged, why is he like that? Thorne's face darkened. "Because we were betrayed. Someone tipped them off about the plan. They sabotaged the timing of the explosion. Julian was supposed to be in the water, safe, before the charge detonated. Instead, the blast went off while he was still on the deck. He took the brunt of the force. I managed to pull him out of the water before the Coast Guard arrived. But the damage was severe. He has been in a coma since I brought him here." My knees gave out. I slid down the wall, gasping for air. Alive. Julian was alive. But he was broken. He was lying there, fighting for every breath, while I had been standing at his funeral. "Can I see him?" I begged, looking up at Thorne. "Please, I need to be close to him." Thorne hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. "He is in a highly sterile environment. You cannot touch him. Elise, the risk of infection is too high. But you can go up to the glass." He swiped his badge. And the door to the inner chamber opened with a hiss of decompressed air. I walked in, my legs feeling like lead. The sound of the ventilator was loud in the quiet room. Hiss, click, Hiss. I approached the bed. The man was wrapped in white. I could not see his hair. I could not see his eyes. Panic flared in my chest. What if this was a trick? What if this doctor was insane? And this was just some stranger? How do I know? I whispered, my voice trembling. I cannot see his face. Thorne stepped up beside me. Look at his left arm. I looked. The arm was resting on top of the sheet, connected to 3 different IV lines. The skin was pale, almost translucent, but there, running from the elbow to the wrist, was a jagged white line. I gasped. It was a scar from a cycling accident when he was 12. He had fallen into a ravine. He used to joke that it was his shark bite. I had kissed that scar 1,000 times. I knew the texture of it. I knew the way it curved slightly near the wrist. It was him. Julian, I sobbed, pressing my hand against the cold glass of the isolation barrier that separated us. Oh God, Julian. He did not move. His chest rose and fell mechanically. He looked so small, so fragile. He can hear you, Thorne said softly. I believe that. Speak to him. I am here, I choked out, tears streaming down my face. I am here, my love, and our baby is safe. I will not let you go. You have to wake up. Please, Julian, you have to wake up. Thorne placed a hand on my shoulder after a few minutes. That is enough for now. Elise, his vitals are spiking. We need to let him rest. He guided me out of the room, back into the hallway. I felt drained, hollowed out, but filled with a strange, fierce new energy, hope. It was a dangerous thing, but it was all I had. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked as the heavy door locked behind us. Why let me go through that funeral? Why let Victoria throw me out? Thorne stopped walking. He turned to me, and his face was hard, his eyes flashing with a cold anger. Because we needed to know who the leak was, he said. We needed to know who betrayed Julian's location to the organization. We thought it was a mole in the company, but we were wrong. He pulled a tablet from his pocket and tapped the screen. He handed it to me. It was a bank transfer record, a transfer of $5 million from an offshore account into a private holding company. Look at the date, Thorne said. 2 days before the explosion. I looked. Who owns this account? The shell company leads back to one person, Thorne said. Victoria Vance? I stared at him, unable to comprehend the words. His mother? You are saying his mother paid someone to kill him? She did not just pay someone, Thorne said, his voice low and venomous. She sold him. Victoria Vance made a deal with the cartel. They get the money laundering routes, and she gets full control of Vance Tech. Unimpeded by Julian's ethical concerns, she traded her son's life for power. Elise, the room spun. I thought of Victoria at the funeral. Her fake tears, her cold eyes. I thought of her throwing that money at me in the snow. Get rid of it. She wasn't just a cruel mother-in-law. She was a monster. She thinks he is dead, Thorne said. That is the only reason he is still breathing. But she knows you are alive, and she knows that as long as you carry Julian's child, her control over the empire is threatened. That baby is the heir. That is why she tried to force you to abort. That is why she threw you out. She wants to erase every trace of Julian so she can sit on her throne alone. She wants to kill us, I whispered, the realization settling in my bones like ice. Yes, Thorne said. She does, and if you had stayed in Chicago, you would be dead by now. That clinic? It was a test. If you had gone through with the abortion, she might have let you live as a broken, empty shell. But because you hesitated, her men were waiting outside to finish the job. I looked back at the door where my husband lay broken and comatose. I touched my stomach. The fear that had paralyzed me for days began to boil away, replaced by a rage so hot it felt like it could melt the snow on the mountains outside. Victoria Vance had taken my home. She had tried to take my dignity. She had tried to kill my child. And she had shattered my husband's body for a seat at the head of a table. I looked up at Doctor. Thorn. At that moment, I did not see a stranger or a doctor. I saw a guardian angel, a savior who had pulled my husband from the fire and me from the ice. "What do we do?" I asked. My voice was steady. The tears had stopped. Thorn smiled, a small, grim curving of his lips. "We wait, we heal, we keep Julian alive until he can wake up and testify, and while we wait, we prepare. You are safe here. Elise, I will protect you and that child with my life, but you must trust me, completely. No contact with the outside world, no phones, no internet. Any signal going out could lead them right to us. I trust you," I said without hesitation. "I trust you with everything." "Good," Thorn said, "because the storm is coming. Elise, and when it hits, we need to be the ones left standing." He walked away down the long, silent corridor, his footsteps echoing on the marble. I stood there for a moment longer, looking at the biometric lock that guarded my husband. I was in a cage. Yes, a cage of glass and steel buried in the mountains, but for the first time since the police knocked on my door, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier in a bunker, waiting for the command to fire. I placed my hand on my belly. "We are going to make her pay," I whispered to the darkness. "We are going to take everything from her." I did not know it then, but I had just signed a contract with the devil, and the price would be far higher than I could ever imagine. The mountain air at the summit was thin and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating smog of my life in Chicago. 2 weeks had passed since Dr. Thorn had pulled me from the edge of oblivion, and in that time, the shivering, starving creature I had become was slowly being rebuilt. I ate 3 balanced meals a day, prepared by a silent kitchen staff I rarely saw. I took long showers in a marble bathroom that rivaled the one at the Blackwood Manor. My belly had rounded out slightly more, and the constant cramping that had plagued me in the city had vanished, replaced by the reassuring, rhythmic kicks of the life growing inside me. But this was not a vacation. It was a war room. Every morning, after breakfast, Thorn would summon me to his study. It was a cavernous room lined with mahogany bookshelves, dominated by a massive oak desk where he orchestrated our counterattack. He was no longer just the kindly doctor who had wiped gel from my stomach. He was a general, meticulous and terrifyingly intelligent. "Look at this, Elise," Thorn said one Tuesday morning, sliding a thick black binder across the polished wood of his desk. I opened it. The pages were filled with bank statements, emails, and phone transcripts. My eyes widened as I scanned the highlighted sections. "This is," I stammered, my finger tracing a line of numbers that represented millions of dollars. "Proof," Thorn said, leaning back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "These are records of unauthorized transfers from the Vance Tech Charity Fund into private offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, accounts controlled by Victoria Vance. She has been embezzling for 5 years. That is why the company's liquidity was down last quarter. She is bleeding the beast dry." He flipped the page. "And this," he pointed to a transcript of a text message exchange, "is the communication between Victoria and a known broker for contract killers in Detroit. The date aligns perfectly with the week the yacht explosion was planned." I felt a wave of nausea. Seeing it in black and white was different from hearing the theory. It made the evil tangible. She really did it. She paid to have her own son blown apart. "She is desperate," Thorn said, his voice smooth. "And desperate people make mistakes. But we need more than just this dossier. We need the court of public opinion. We need to make you untouchable." He stood up and walked to a tripod set up in the corner of the room. A high-definition camera was mounted on it, its lens staring at me like an unblinking eye. "It is time to tell your story, Elise," Thorn said. "We are going to record a video, a statement. You will tell the world that you are alive, that you are pregnant with Julian's heir, and that you are in hiding because you fear for your life. We will not name Victoria directly. That would be libel. But we will say that powerful forces within the family are hunting you." I hesitated, pulling my cardigan tighter around myself. "Will this not tell her where I am?" "We will route the upload through servers in Russia and Brazil," Thorne assured me. "It will be untraceable, but once this video hits the news, the public will rally behind you. If anything happens to you after this, the entire world will look at her. It is the ultimate shield." I sat in the chair he indicated. The red light of the camera blinked on. I thought of the snow. I thought of the $100. I thought of Julian lying broken in the glass room down the hall. I looked into the lens, and I did not have to act. The tears that welled in my eyes were real. The tremor in my voice was real. I told the world I was scared. I told them I was alone. I begged for my baby's life. When Thorne shouted cut, he was smiling. "Perfect," he said. "That will destroy her." Later that evening, Thorne turned on the television in the lounge. Every news channel was running my video. It had gone viral within 2 hours. Commentators were debating. Social media was exploding with the hashtag #FindElise. Then, the screen cut to a press conference. Victoria Vance stood at a podium, dressed in mourning black, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "We are devastated," she sobbed into the microphones. "My daughter-in-law is clearly suffering from a mental breakdown due to grief. We just want her home. Elise, if you are watching, please come back to Blackwood. We love you." "Liar," I hissed at the screen, my hands clenching into fists. "She is a monster." "She is good," Thorne admitted, pouring himself a glass of amber liquid. "But look at her eyes. Elise, she is terrified. She knows the walls are closing in." I felt a surge of triumph. We were winning. For the first time, I felt like I was not just a pawn, but a player in the game. I looked at Thorne with gratitude. He was saving us. However, as the days turned into a third week, the atmosphere in the house began to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. It started with Nora. Nora was a new addition to my care team. Thorne introduced her as a private nurse he had hired to assist with my prenatal checkups and to monitor Julian's condition. She was a small, bird-like woman with pale skin and nervous hands. She rarely spoke, moving through the rooms like a shadow, always keeping her eyes on the floor. But I caught her watching me. One afternoon, while I was reading in the library, I looked up to find Nora standing in the doorway, holding a tray of tea. She was staring at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't malice. It looked like pity. It looked like she wanted to say something but was terrified the walls were listening. "Is everything okay, Nora?" I asked. She flinched, the teacups rattling on their saucers. "Yes, ma'am. Just checking if you needed anything." "I am fine," I said. "Thank you." She set the tray down and hurried out. But as she passed me, I saw a bruise on her wrist, partially hidden by the sleeve of her uniform. I frowned. Thorne treated his staff well. Or so I thought. I pushed the observation to the back of my mind, focusing on the more pressing matter. Julian. My husband was still in the glass room, still in a coma. Thorne allowed me to visit him once a day, but only for 10 minutes, and always through the glass. He claimed Julian's immune system was non-existent, and that even a particle of dust could kill him. On Thursday, I went down for my daily visit. The hallway was empty. I approached the observation window, placing my hand on the cool glass. "Hi, Julian," I whispered. "We are fighting back. You would be proud." Suddenly, the machine monitoring his heart rate began to beep erratically. Julian's body, which had been so still for weeks, jerked violently. His back arched off the bed. His arms thrashed against the restraints. White foam began to bubble at the corners of his mouth. "Julian!" I screamed, banging on the glass. "Help! Someone help him!" The door to the inner chamber hissed open, and Thorne rushed in. Followed by 2 large orderlies I had never seen before, they didn't look like medical staff. They moved with the brutal efficiency of soldiers. Thorne grabbed a syringe and plunged it into Julian's IV line. Julian convulsed one last time and then went limp. Thorne turned to the window. Seeing me standing there in horror, he stormed out into the hallway, his face flushed. "What happened?" I cried, grabbing his arm. "Is he dying? Why was he shaking like that?" Thorne pulled his arm away, smoothing his lab coat. "It was a neurological storm, a seizure. It is a common side effect of the experimental regenerative therapy we are using to knit his bones back together. It looks frightening, but it is a sign that his nervous system is reactivating." "It looked like he was in pain," I said, my voice shaking. "Let me go in. Please, he needs me." "Absolutely not," Thorne snapped. It was the first time he had raised his voice at me. He seemed to realize his mistake immediately and softened his tone. "Elise, you are pregnant. The stress of being in that room, the radiation from the equipment is not safe for the baby. Trust me." I stabilized him. He ushered me away, back toward the residential wing. "Go rest. Nora will bring you your evening supplements." I went to my room, but I did not rest. The image of Julian thrashing against the restraints burned in my mind, and something else nagged at me. The orderlies. One of them had a tattoo on his neck, a scorpion. It seemed out of place for a sterile, high-end medical facility. That night, sleep was impossible. The house, usually silent, felt alive with whispers. Around 2 a.m, thirst drove me out of bed. I walked down the dark hallway toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I passed Thorne's study, I saw a sliver of light under the door. He was still awake. I heard his voice, low and murmuring. I stopped. I knew I shouldn't eavesdrop, but the anxiety from the afternoon's incident made me reckless. I crept closer, pressing my ear against the wood. "Yes, the vitals are holding," Thorne was saying. "No, not yet. The fish has taken the bait, but we need to set the hook deeper." I held my breath. Was he talking about Victoria? Was the fish his mother-in-law? "Don't worry," Thorne continued, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. It was a cold, dry sound. "I will keep the vegetable watered until he signs the transfer papers. Once I have the signature, you can have the carcass." My heart stopped. Vegetables? Carcass? He wasn't talking about Victoria. He was talking about Julian. Or was he talking about me? Who was he talking to? And what transfer papers? Julian had already left everything to me in his will, unless there were assets the will didn't cover, or unless Thorne wanted something else entirely. And the girl? The voice on the other end was inaudible, but Thorne's answer chilled my blood. "She is pliable. The pregnancy makes her emotional, easy to steer. She thinks I am a saint. She will do whatever I say. Just have the funds ready." I backed away, my bare feet silent on the carpet. My head was spinning. Pliable, easy to steer. This was not the language of an ally. This was the language of a predator. I hurried back to my room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. What had I done? I had walked right into a trap. I had brought my baby into a prison. A soft knock on the door made me jump. "Mrs. Vance?" It was Nora's voice. "I have your evening medication." I couldn't refuse. If I acted suspicious, Thorne would know. I forced myself to breathe, to smooth my features into a mask of calm. I unlocked the door. Nora stood there with a small paper cup and a glass of water. In the cup were 2 pills, one white, one blue. The white one was the prenatal vitamin I took every day. The blue one was new. "Doctor, Thorne prescribed a sedative," Nora whispered, her eyes darting to the hallway behind her, "to help you sleep after the shock of seeing Mr. Vance today." She stepped into the room and closed the door. As she handed me the water, her fingers brushed against my palm. I felt something small and sharp scratch my skin. A piece of paper. I looked at her. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She nodded almost imperceptibly at the cup. I took the cup. I put the white pill in my mouth and swallowed it with a gulp of water. Then I picked up the blue pill. Nora's hand shot out and gripped my wrist. It was a lightning-fast movement. She leaned in, her lips barely moving. "Do not," she breathed. She released me just as quickly. Stepping back to a respectful distance, I stared at her, then at the blue pill. I understood. I brought the cup to my lips, feigning a swallow, but I slipped the blue pill under my tongue. I drank the water. "Thank you, Nora," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "Sleep well, ma'am," she said. Her voice was flat, professional, but her eyes were screaming. As soon as she left, I rushed to the bathroom and spat the blue pill into the toilet. It dissolved into a murky azure cloud before I flushed it away. I unfolded the tiny scrap of paper Nora had pressed into my hand. It was torn from a medical wrapper. Scrawled in shaky ballpoint pen were 10 words. "Do not take the blue pill, and don't trust anyone." I sank onto the cold tile floor. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. The seizure that looked like torture, the orderlies with tattoos, the phone call about carcasses and vegetables, and now, the sedative. Thorne didn't want me to sleep. He wanted me unconscious. He wanted me compliant. I was not a guest. Julian was not a patient. We were leverage. I sat in the dark, the adrenaline sharpening my senses. I could not sleep. Not tonight. I needed to see what happened in this house when the guests were supposed to be dreaming. I cracked my door open just an inch. The hallway was dark, but I could see shadows moving. Thorne was walking down the hall toward the medical wing. He wasn't walking with the heavy gait of a tired doctor. He was whistling. I realized then that the blizzard outside was the least of my problems. The real cold was right here, inside these walls. And if I wanted to save my baby, I would have to stop being the grieving widow. I had to become something else. I had to become the woman who burned down hell. I waited until his footsteps faded. Then I slipped out of my room. Moving into the shadows, the hunt had begun. But this time, the prey was awake. The house was breathing. That was the first thing I noticed when I stepped out of my room and into the suffocating darkness of the corridor. During the day, the summit hummed with the efficient, comforting sounds of a high-end medical facility, but at night, stripped of the polite veneer of the nursing staff and the ambient music, the building revealed its true skeleton. It did not sound like a hospital. It sounded like a machine. I heard the heavy metallic clank of automated locks engaging on the exterior doors. I heard the low-frequency drone of a ventilation system that seemed too powerful for a simple residential home. I was barefoot, clutching the edges of my silk robe, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had spat out the blue pill, but the phantom taste of betrayal still lingered on my tongue. "Don't trust anyone," Nora had written. The warning was not just about the medication. It was about the walls, the floor, the very air I was breathing. I moved toward the West Wing, where Thorne's study was located. My architectural training, which I had suppressed in my grief, suddenly surged to the forefront. I began to look at the building not as a guest, but as a designer. I noticed things I had ignored before. The windows were not just double-paned. They were reinforced polycarbonate, the kind used in maximum security psychiatric wards. The decorative latticework on the balconies was not aesthetic. It was a cleverly disguised anti-climb mesh. The layout of the corridors was a labyrinth designed to disorient, channeling movement toward central choke points. This was not a sanctuary. It was a cage, a 5-star, gold-plated prison designed to keep the world out and the inmates in. I reached the heavy oak door of Thorne's study. It was closed. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. The sliver of light I had seen earlier was gone. He must have gone to the lower levels, to the lab where my husband lay in his glass coffin. I tried the handle, locked. Panic flared, hot and sharp. I had risked everything leaving my room. If I went back now, I would remain in the dark, a sheep waiting for the slaughter. I looked around desperately. Above the doorframe, there was a small, decorative transom window. It was high, but the trim around the door was thick enough to offer a foothold. I was 5 months pregnant, heavy and awkward, but fear is a potent fuel. I stepped onto a nearby console table, wincing as the wood creaked, and reached for the transom. It was unlatched. Thorne's arrogance was his weakness. He believed his electronic locks were infallible. So he neglected the analog ones. I pushed the glass panel open and squeezed my arm through, straining to reach the interior handle. My fingers grazed the cold metal. I stretched, my shoulders screaming in protest, until I felt the latch click. I dropped back to the floor, gasping for air, and pushed the door open. The study smelled of stale coffee and ambition. Moonlight filtered through the blinds, slicing the room into strips of gray and black. I did not dare turn on the light. I moved to the massive desk, my hands shaking as I opened the top drawer. It was locked. I tried the second. Locked. I turned to the filing cabinets lining the wall. They were standard steel cabinets, the kind that could be opened with a simple letter opener if you knew where to apply pressure. I grabbed a brass letter opener from the desk and went to work. It took me 3 agonizing minutes of jiggling and twisting before the lock sprang open with a loud pop. I froze, waiting for alarms, for footsteps. Nothing. I pulled the drawer open. Hanging files, color-coded and labeled with numbers. Not names. I scanned them frantically. Thorne was meticulous. There had to be a system. I found a section labeled Vance. J. My breath hitched. I pulled the thick file out and carried it to the window. Using the moonlight to read, the first page was a standard medical intake form. But as I flipped through the charts, the medical terminology, which had once been foreign to me but was now familiar after weeks of Thorne's lectures, began to paint a horrific picture. Patient status, induced coma, medication protocol, propofol, 50 milligrams per hour, midazolam, continuous infusion. I stared at the numbers. These were not therapeutic doses for a recovering trauma victim. These were suppression doses. "He is not healing," I whispered, the paper trembling in my hands. "You are keeping him down." I flipped to the surgical notes. There were no notes on bone reconstruction, no notes on skin grafts for burns. The only surgeries listed were for the insertion of feeding tubes and central lines. The seizure I had witnessed earlier was noted in the log. Subject showed signs of breakthrough consciousness due to missed dosage cycle. Resedation administered immediately. Julian wasn't broken. He wasn't dying from an explosion. He was being chemically silenced. Thorne was not saving his life. He was stealing it. Hour by hour. Milligram by milligram. I felt a bile rise in my throat. I flipped to the back of the file, looking for the personal correspondence I had seen Thorne holding days ago. I found a dossier on Thorne himself, perhaps kept for his own ego. Clippings from dark web forums, printed emails encrypted with PGP keys. Dr. Elias Thorne. Alias, the zookeeper. Specialty, high-value asset containment and behavioral modification. He wasn't a doctor. He was a jailer for the elite. A mercenary who didn't kill people but made them disappear into comfortable, drug-induced hells until they became useful. And then, I found the contract. It was a physical document, signed in ink. The signature at the bottom was elegant, spiky, and familiar. I had seen it on birthday cards and passive-aggressive notes for 2 years. Victoria Vance. I read the terms, and my world fractured. Objective: secure subject. Julian Vance. Maintain viable biological functions but suppress cognitive awareness indefinitely. Stage level 4. Extraction event. Explosion. Reason for containment. Asset liquidity and power of attorney transfer. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. Victoria had not tried to kill Julian. She needed him alive. The will Julian had left, the one giving everything to me, only covered his personal wealth. But the Vance family trust, the massive iron vault that held the true power of the corporation, required the signature of the living male heir to be unlocked or modified. Victoria couldn't kill him, or the trust would dissolve into a charitable foundation, leaving her with nothing. But she couldn't control him either, so she had hired Thorne to turn her son into a sleeping ghost. She had staged his death to get me out of the picture. If I was gone, chased away, discredited as an adulteress, or forced to abort the baby, she would be the closest living relative. She could petition the court for conservatorship over her comatose son and wield his pen as her own. "You sick, twisted witch," I hissed, tears of rage burning my eyes. But as I read further, I saw handwritten notes in the margins of the contract. Thorne's handwriting, client unstable, payment delayed, new strategy, squeeze both ends. I turned the page to a printed email from Thorne to Victoria, dated 2 days ago. "My dear Victoria, the price has gone up. Julian is awake enough to feel pain, which makes him very cooperative when I need him to be. And the wife? She is here, and she is pregnant. A healthy heir means your claim to the conservatorship is weak. If you want the boy and the girl to disappear permanently, the transfer needs to be 50% of the voting stock, directly to me, or I wake Julian up, give him a phone, and let him call the FBI." I covered my mouth to stifle a scream. Thorne had double-crossed her. He wasn't working for Victoria anymore. He had kidnapped the kidnapper's prize. He was holding Julian hostage to blackmail Victoria. And he was holding me. Why was he holding me? I found a separate sheet, a medical protocol with my name on it. Elise Marquette. Subject B. Gestation. 22 weeks. Value. High leverage against Subject A. Julian Vance. Action. Isolate until delivery. If negotiation with Victoria fails, use fetal distress to induce compliance from Subject A. I was not a guest. I was not a patient. I was a bargaining chip. He was keeping me alive just so he could threaten to hurt our baby if Julian didn't sign the papers. We were livestock. All of us. A sound cut through the silence. Click, whir. The biometric lock on the front door of the study. Someone was coming in. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. I shoved the papers back into the file. But my hands were shaking so badly I dropped a page. It fluttered to the floor, landing under the desk. I didn't have time to retrieve it. The heavy footsteps were already in the anteroom. I scrambled backward, looking for a hiding place. The desk was open underneath, too visible. The curtains were too sheer. The closet. It was a tall, narrow coat closet near the bookshelf. I dove inside, pulling the door shut just as the main door to the study swung open. I left a crack, a hair-thin sliver of space, so the latch wouldn't click and give me away. I held my breath, pressing my hands over my mouth. My heart was beating so loud, I was sure he could hear it. Thorne walked into the room. He didn't turn on the main lights. He walked to the desk, the glow of his smartphone illuminating his face. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, but there was a manic energy vibrating off him. He picked up the phone and dialed. He put it on speaker and tossed it onto the desk, right above where I was crouching in the darkness. "Talk to me," Thorne barked. A voice crackled on the other end. It was the mercenary with the scorpion tattoo I had seen earlier. "Victoria is stalling," the man said. "She says she needs another week to liquidate the assets without alerting the SEC. She thinks you're bluffing about the girl." Thorne laughed. It was a sound devoid of any humanity. It was the sound of a butcher sharpening a knife. "She thinks I am bluffing?" Thorne walked around the desk. I could see his shoes, polished black leather, inches from my hiding spot. "She clearly has forgotten who I am. I do not bluff. I execute." He picked up a silver letter opener, the same one I had used to shimmy the lock, and tapped it rhythmically against the desk. Tap, tap, tap. "Change of plans," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "We do not wait for the natural birth. It is taking too long, and Julian is fighting the sedation too hard. He keeps asking for her." "What do you want to do, boss?" the mercenary asked. "Prep the surgical suite for tomorrow night," Thorne said. "We are going to do a C-section." My blood froze in my veins. Tomorrow night? I was only 5 months along. The baby wouldn't survive without specialized NICU care, which this hellhole certainly didn't have. Or maybe he didn't care if the baby survived. "Is it safe? For the merchandise?" the mercenary asked. "The baby is a better bargaining chip than the mother," Thorne said coldly. "If I have the infant in an incubator, Julian will sign anything I put in front of him to keep the oxygen flowing. And Victoria? She will pay double to keep the heir alive, or triple to let it die. Either way, I win." "And the mother?" Thorne paused. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Elise has served her purpose, he said dismissively. Once the child is out, she is a liability. Complications during surgery are tragic, but common. Make it look like an embolism. Dispose of the body in the incinerator. I bit down on my hand so hard I tasted copper. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. He was going to cut me open. He was going to take my baby to use as a hostage, and then he was going to burn me like garbage. Understood, the mercenary said. I will tell the team to prep the OR. Do it, Thorne said. And check on her room. Make sure she took the sedative. I want her groggy and compliant in the morning. No heroics. Copy that. The call ended. Thorne stood there for a moment longer. Then, he sighed. A long, weary exhale, as if planning a double murder was just another tiresome administrative task. He turned and walked out of the room. Switching off the desk lamp, the door clicked shut behind him. I stayed in the closet for a long time, listening to the silence of the house. It was no longer a machine. It was a tomb. Slowly, carefully. I pushed the closet door open. My legs were numb, but my mind was razor sharp. The fear had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I was not going to be a tragedy. I was not going to be a liability. I crept out of the study, clutching my stomach. I had 24 hours. 24 hours before they cut me open. 24 hours to navigate a fortress, wake a comatose man, and escape an army of mercenaries. I moved back into the shadows of the hallway. I wasn't going back to my room to wait for death. I was going to find Nora, and then we were going to wake the dragon. Thorne wanted a war. He had made a fatal mistake. He thought he was fighting a widow. He didn't know he was fighting a mother. And for my child, I would tear this mountain down stone by stone. I slipped back into my room like a phantom, the door clicking shut with a sound that felt deafening in the silence of the sleeping house. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I leaned against the wood, gasping for air, my mind racing through the horrors I had just overheard. Incinerator, C-section, tomorrow night. The words were a drumbeat of death marching toward me. I could not stay here. I could not wait for morning. I moved to the small desk in the corner of the room. I needed a weapon, a plan, an ally. My eyes landed on the tray Nora had left earlier, the empty water glass, the napkin. I grabbed the napkin and a pen from the bedside table. My hand hovered over the paper. I was an architect. I solved structural problems for a living. I fixed broken landscapes. And right now, this house was the most broken landscape I had ever encountered. A soft scratch at the door made me freeze. Mrs. Vance? It was a whisper, barely audible. I unlocked the door and yanked it open. Nora stood there, looking terrified. She was holding a fresh stack of towels, a flimsy excuse to be wandering the halls at 3 a.m. I pulled her inside and locked the door behind her. I didn't swallow it, I said, my voice low and fierce. Nora's eyes widened. She dropped the towels. You heard? I heard everything, I hissed, grabbing her shoulders. I was in his study. Nora, he is going to kill me tomorrow night. He is going to cut the baby out and throw me in the incinerator. Nora's face turned ashen. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I knew it, she sobbed quietly. I knew he was done with the waiting game. He is running out of money. He needs the leverage now. Why are you helping him? I asked, kneeling beside her. You are not like them. You warned me about the pill. Why are you still here? Nora looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a profound, aching misery. She pulled up the sleeve of her scrub top. It wasn't just a bruise I had seen earlier. It was a burn mark, a cigarette burn. My brother, she whispered. Toby. He is 19. He got into trouble with some loan sharks in Detroit. Thorne bought his debt. He has Toby in a facility upstate. He sends me videos. If I leave, or if I talk Toby dies. I felt a surge of empathy that momentarily eclipsed my own fear. We were both prisoners here, bound by the same monster. We can get Toby out, I said, gripping her hand. But not if we die here. We have to leave. Nora, tonight? We can't. She shook her head frantically. The perimeter is alarmed. The guards have thermal scopes. And Mr. Vance, we can't just wheel a comatose man out the front door. We are not going out the front door, I said, standing up and pacing the room. And Julian is not going to be wheeled out. He is going to walk out. Nora looked at me like I had lost my mind. He has been under heavy sedation for weeks. His muscles are atrophied. He can barely breathe on his own. Thorne said his vitals were strong, I countered. He said Julian was fighting the sedation. That means his brain is active. We just need to wake him up. Completely. Is there an antidote? A reversal agent? Nora hesitated, biting her lip. There is flumazenil, and a stimulant cocktail we use for emergency arousal during surgery. It is in the biosafe in the main lab, but only Thorne has the code. Thorne is arrogant, I said. He relies on technology too much. What is the make of the safe? It is a Titan 400, Nora said. Biometric and keypad. Titan, I repeated, a memory flashing in my mind. I designed a secure storage facility for a bank in Seattle 2 years ago. We used Titans. There is a manual override key slot under the digital panel, in case of power failure. Do you know where the physical keys are? Thorne wears them around his neck, Nora said hopelessly. But there is a spare set. In the security office, the head of the guard detail keeps them. Okay, I said, my brain shifting into high gear. We need a distraction. A big one. I grabbed the napkin I had been staring at earlier. I flattened it out on the desk. Come here, Nora. Look at this. I began to draw. It wasn't a pretty sketch, but it was accurate. My mind deconstructed the mansion, peeling back the luxury finishes to reveal the infrastructure underneath. This is the West Wing, I said, sketching the outline. We are here. The lab is here. The security office is near the garage. Now, look at the topography. We are built into a cliff. The drainage for the septic system and the medical waste disposal has to go somewhere. It cannot go uphill. I drew a line descending from the basement level. There, I pointed. The storm runoff culvert. It exits at the base of the ravine. Past the perimeter fence, it will be tight, and it will be freezing. But it is the only blind spot in the thermal grid, because the water temperature masks body heat. Nora looked at the drawing, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes. The maintenance hatch for the culvert is in the sub-basement, near the laundry. Exactly, I said. So here's the plan. I looked at the clock. It was 3:30 in the morning. I am going to fake a medical emergency, I said. Premature labor, bleeding, something that will make them panic. They cannot let the baby die. Thorne will come running. The guards will come running. And while they are focused on you, Nora breathed, you go to the security office, I commanded. It will be empty, or at least understaffed. Get the key. Go to the lab. Get the cocktail. Then meet me in Julian's room. It is suicide, Nora whispered. No, I said, placing my hand on my stomach. Staying here is suicide. This is a jailbreak. We spent the next 10 minutes refining the details. Nora gave me a small vial of red dye she used for marking slides. It would pass for blood in the dim light. I tore my nightgown slightly to look more distressed. Ready? I asked, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Nora nodded, her face pale but set with a new determination. For Toby. For Julian, I said, and for Hope. Hope? The baby, I said. That is her name. Nora opened the door and slipped out. I waited 2 minutes, 120 seconds of agonizing silence. Then, I unleashed the scream. It was a primal, guttural sound that tore through the quiet hallway. I knocked a lamp off the table, shattering it. I poured the red dye onto my legs and the floor. I curled up in the center of the rug, clutching my stomach and screaming again. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Mrs. Vance! It was the guard with the scorpion tattoo. He kicked the door open, his gun drawn. When he saw me, or what he thought was me, bleeding and writhing on the floor, he holstered the weapon and grabbed his radio. "Code Blue! Residential wing! The subject is hemorrhaging! Get Thorne up here! Now!" He ran to me, his face pale. "Ma'am, stay calm." "It hurts," I wailed, digging my nails into his arm. "My baby! Something is wrong!" Thorne appeared less than a minute later, wearing a silk robe, his hair disheveled. He took one look at the red stain on the carpet, and his face twisted in fury. "Get a gurney!" he roared at the guard. "Do not just stand there, you idiot! If we lose that fetus, I will skin you alive." The guard scrambled away. Thorne knelt beside me, his hands checking my pulse, his eyes scanning the blood. "What did you do?" he hissed at me. "Did you take something?" "Help me," I sobbed, playing the part of the terrified victim to perfection. "Please, save her." 2 more orderlies arrived with a stretcher. They lifted me onto it. As they wheeled me out, I saw Thorne sprinting toward the surgical suite, barking orders into his phone. The corridor to the security office was empty. "Go, Nora, go." They wheeled me toward the medical wing, but not to the operating room. Thorne directed them to the triage bay next to Julian's isolation room. "Stabilize her here first," Thorne ordered. "I need to scrub in. Hook her up to the fetal monitor." They busied themselves with attaching sensors to my stomach. The moment the monitor picked up the heartbeat, strong and fast, Thorne paused. He frowned at the red stain on my legs, then touched it. He rubbed the liquid between his fingers and sniffed it. His eyes snapped to mine. They were not worried anymore. They were cold, lethal. "Die," he whispered. He realized it. "Lock the doors," Thorne shouted, spinning around. "It is a diversion. Check the lab." But it was too late. The door to the triage bay burst open. Nora stood there, her chest heaving, a syringe in her hand. She didn't look at Thorne. She looked at the glass wall separating us from Julian. "Stop her," Thorne screamed. Lunging forward, I threw myself off the gurney. Colliding with Thorne's legs, we crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. I wasn't strong, but I was desperate. I clawed at his face, buying Nora seconds. "Do it, Nora!" I screamed. Nora slammed her hand onto the door release for Julian's room. She had the security key card. She must have swiped it from the office, too. The door hissed open. She ran inside. The guard with the scorpion tattoo raised his gun. "No!" Thorne yelled, struggling to pin my arms. "Do not shoot in there! You will hit the tank! The gas!" Nora reached the bed. She didn't hesitate. She jammed the needle into Julian's neck, right into the carotid artery, and depressed the plunger. "Clear!" she shouted, stepping back. For a second, nothing happened. The room was silent except for Thorne cursing as he pinned me to the floor. Then, Julian gasped. It was a terrible, wet sound, like a drowning man breaking the surface. His back arched off the mattress so violently the bed frame rattled. His eyes flew open. They were wild, bloodshot, seeing nothing. He let out a roar of pure agony as the chemicals flooded his system, shocking his dormant neurons back to life. "Julian!" I screamed, kicking Thorne in the shin and scrambling toward the glass. Thorne grabbed my ankle, dragging me back. "You stupid girl! You have killed him! The shock will stop his heart." But Julian's heart did not stop. The monitor was screaming a frantic rhythm, but it was steady. He thrashed against the restraints, snapping one of the leather straps on his right wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. He ripped the breathing tube out of his throat. Gagging and coughing, he rolled off the bed, crashing onto the floor, tangling in the IV lines. "Julian!" I cried again, tears streaming down my face. He looked up. Through the glass, his eyes met mine. The madness in them cleared for a split second, replaced by recognition, and then horror. "Elise?" he croaked. his voice like gravel. He looked at his hands. He looked at the room. He looked at Thorn, who was now standing over me, panting, and then he looked at the reflection in the glass. The reflection of a man who had been dead to the world. "Get away from her," Julian growled. He tried to stand, stumbling, using the IV pole for support. Thorn pulled a gun from the back of his waistband. He aimed it at Julian through the open door. "Stay down, Vance," Thorn said, his voice shaking with rage. "Or I put you back to sleep permanently." Suddenly, a siren began to wail, a high-pitched, oscillating shriek that made my teeth ache. Red strobe lights began to flash in the hallway. "Intruder alert," a robotic voice announced. "Biosafe breach detected, lockdown initiated, police notification pending." Nora had triggered the silent alarm in the safe, but because she had used the physical key override, the system interpreted it as a brute force attack and defaulted to the highest security protocol. Thorn looked at the flashing lights, distraction flickering in his eyes. "You called the police?" Thorn snarled at Nora. "No," Nora said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I just broke your piggy bank." "We have 5 minutes before the private security contractors arrive," Thorn calculated, his face hardening. "And 10 before the state police." He grabbed me by the hair, hauling me up. I cried out in pain. He pressed the barrel of the gun against my temple. "Get up, Julian," Thorn shouted. "Walk out of that room, or I paint the walls with your wife's brains." Julian stood up. He was swaying, pale as a sheet, wearing nothing but a hospital gown. But he stood. He looked at Thorn, and the hatred in his eyes was cold enough to freeze the sun. "I am coming," Julian said. "Good," Thorn sneered, backing toward the exit, dragging me with him. "We are leaving, all of us, and if anyone tries anything, the girl dies first." I looked at Nora. She was cornered by the guard. I looked at Julian. He was weak, barely able to walk. But he was alive. We were together, but the trap hadn't broken. It had just gotten smaller. Thorn dragged me into the corridor, the red lights painting us in blood. The alliance in the shadows had worked. We had woken the dragon. Now, we just had to survive the fire. The red emergency lights pulsed like a dying heart, bathing the corridor in a rhythmic, nauseating crimson. The siren was deafening, a mechanical scream that shattered the oppressive silence of the summit. In the chaos of the flashing lights and the robotic voice announcing the lockdown, the grip on my arm loosened for a fraction of a second. "Doctor," Thorn was distracted. He was shouting orders at the guard with the scorpion tattoo, his eyes darting to the keypad on the wall that was currently flashing an error message. He had underestimated the chaos of his own security system. "Override the sector," Thorn roared, turning his head away from me. "Seal the perimeter." That was my chance. I did not think. I reacted. I swung my elbow back with every ounce of strength I possessed, driving it into Thorn's solar plexus. He grunted, doubling over, his hand slipping from my hair. I didn't wait to see him recover. I lunged toward Julian, who was leaning heavily against the wall, his eyes wide and unfocused, his body trembling from the chemical shock of the awakening. "Move!" I screamed, grabbing his arm. "Julian, we have to move!" Nora was already there, supporting his other side. Together, we hauled him forward, not toward the main exit where the guards were converging, but toward the service door I had spotted on my mental map, the laundry intake chute that connected the medical wing to the basement levels. "Get them!" Thorn screamed behind us. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering the drywall inches from my ear. We crashed through the service door just as the heavy steel fire shutters began to descend from the ceiling. Triggered by the alarm, we slid under the closing metal slab, the heavy clang sealing us off from Thorn and his men for the moment. "Can you walk?" I asked Julian, my hands checking his face. He was pale, sweating profusely, his skin clammy. "I can run," he rasped, though his legs were shaking violently. "Get me boots. My feet." We were in a prep room filled with patient belongings. By a stroke of miracle, Or perhaps Thorne's trophies. A plastic bag labeled Subject A sat on a shelf. Julian tore it open with frantic hands, ignoring the clothes, and pulled out his heavy leather deck boots. He jammed his bare feet into them, not bothering with the laces. "Let's go," he said, his voice gaining a terrifying edge of determination. We moved into the bowels of the house. The corridors here were narrow, concrete, and cold. I led the way, navigating by the memory of the blueprints I had drawn in my mind. We needed to reach the kitchen to access the loading dock, which led to the forest. "They will be waiting at the exits," Nora panted, her small frame struggling under Julian's weight. "Not the kitchen," I said. "The delivery bay has a manual override. I saw it on the schematic." We burst into the main kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and copper cookware. It was empty of staff, but as we reached the center of the room, the double doors on the far side swung open. 2 mercenaries stepped in. They were heavily armed, wearing tactical vests and night vision goggles pushed up on their foreheads. "Target acquired," one of them said into his headset, raising his rifle. "Kitchen." We froze. There was no cover. "Get on the ground," the mercenary shouted. "Hands behind your heads." Julian stepped in front of me, swaying but shielding my body with his. "Run, Elise," he whispered. "No," I snarled. I reached into the deep pocket of my robe. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a knife. But earlier, when I had raided the cleaning cart to find the red dye, I had taken something else. A spray bottle filled with industrial-strength oven cleaner. I pulled the bottle out, adjusted the nozzle to stream, and squeezed the trigger. The stream of caustic chemical hit the lead mercenary square in the face. He screamed, dropping his rifle to claw at his burning eyes. The second mercenary hesitated, distracted by his partner's agony. "Now!" I yelled. I threw a heavy cast-iron skillet from the counter at the second man. It hit him in the shoulder, throwing off his aim as he fired. The bullet sparked harmlessly against the refrigerator. "The window!" Julian shouted. He grabbed a heavy metal rolling cart and, summoning a reserve of strength that defied medical science, rammed it into the floor-to-ceiling glass pane overlooking the back terrace. Crash! The glass shattered into a million diamonds, letting in the freezing howl of the blizzard. The wind hit us instantly, biting and cruel, carrying a swirl of snow into the warm kitchen. "Jump!" Julian commanded. We leaped out into the night. Landing in a snowdrift 3 feet deep, the cold was a physical blow, sucking the breath from my lungs. I was wearing only a nightgown and a robe. Julian was in a hospital gown and boots. Nora in her scrubs. We were woefully unprepared for the mountain winter. "Keep moving," Nora urged, pulling me up. "Into the trees." We scrambled toward the tree line, the snow dragging at our legs like quicksand. Behind us, floodlights snapped on, sweeping the grounds. I heard shouting, the sound of engines revving, and then a sound that chilled my blood even more than the ice. Barking, deep, guttural barking. Dobermans. Thorne had released the dogs. "Faster!" Julian gasped, his arm draped over my shoulder. He was limping heavily, the adrenaline fading, the pain returning. We reached the cover of the pine forest just as the first dogs burst out of the shattered window. We stumbled through the dark woods, the branches whipping our faces, the roots tripping us in the snow. The barking was getting closer. They were faster than us, much faster. "We won't make it," Julian wheezed, stumbling and falling to his knees. "Go, Elise. You have to save the baby." "I am not leaving you," I cried, trying to haul him up. "Get up, Julian, get up." Nora stopped. She looked back at the flashlight beams dancing through the trees, closing in on us. She looked at the dogs, dark shapes tearing through the snow 50 yards away. Then she looked at me. "He is right," Nora said softly. "You won't make it. Not with 3 of you." "What are you doing?" I asked, panic seizing my throat. Nora reached into her pocket and pulled out the vial of Julian's blood she had drawn earlier to test the antidote. She uncorked it and poured it over her own scrub top. "Dogs track scent," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I am going to lead them west, toward the ravine. No, I grabbed her arm. Nora, they will kill you. Thorn will kill me anyway, she said, pulling away. Tears froze on her cheeks. My brother, tell Toby I tried. Tell him I didn't leave him. Nora, please. Run, she screamed, shoving me backward. She turned and sprinted to the left, away from our path, waving her arms and shouting, Over here! Come get me, you bastards! Over here! The dogs swerved. They caught the scent of the fresh blood and the sound of the prey. The pack turned, chasing the small figure disappearing into the dark woods. No, I sobbed, reaching out. Come on, Julian said, his voice breaking. He grabbed my hand, his grip like iron. Don't let her die for nothing. Move, Elise. We ran. We ran until my lungs burned like fire. We ran until I couldn't feel my feet. We ran until the sound of barking and the sickening sounds of a struggle faded into the howling wind behind us. We stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated wooden structure, an old ranger station, abandoned for the winter. We crashed through the rotting door, collapsing onto the dusty floorboards. It was freezing inside, but it was shelter. I crawled over to the door and jammed a broken chair under the handle. Julian lay on his back, gasping for air, clutching his chest. Are you okay? I asked, crawling to him, checking his pulse. Alive, he managed to say. He sat up, wincing, and reached for his right boot. The phone. I need the phone. What phone? I asked, confused. My sat phone, he gritted out, prying the heel of the boot open. I always keep a backup. Thorn didn't check the boots. He pulled out a small, sleek black device. It was a satellite phone, compact and rugged. He pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. Battery, 4%. 4%, Julian whispered. One call. Call the police, I said. Call 911. No, Julian shook his head. Local police might be on Victoria's payroll. Thorn owns this county. We need federal. He dialed a number from memory. His fingers were stiff with cold, fumbling over the keys. Who are you calling? Marcus, he said. FBI. Old friend from college. He's the only one I trust. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Pick up. Please. Pick up. Vance? A voice crackled through the static. It was sharp, surprised. Julian? You're dead. Not yet, Julian rasped. Listen to me. Marcus, I am alive. Elise is alive. We are at the old majestic Pine Ranger Station north ridge of the Summit Estate. Thorn kidnapping, attempted murder. Jesus Christ. Marcus's voice was stunned. I'm in Chicago. I can have a bird in the air in 20 minutes. Give me your exact coordinates. Julian looked at the small GPS readout on the phone screen. 42 degrees, north, 88 west. The screen flickered. Julian? Marcus shouted. I need the seconds. Give me the seconds. 32 point. The screen went black. The phone died. No, I grabbed the phone, shaking it. No, 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 come back. It was dead, a useless brick of plastic. Did he get it? I asked, looking at Julian with wide, terrified eyes. He has the sector, Julian said, leaning his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. He will come. We just have to wait. But we didn't have to wait long. Outside, the snow crunched under heavy boots. Not one pair, many. Bright white beams of tactical flashlights sliced through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, blinding us. We know you are in there. Thorn's voice boomed over a megaphone. There is nowhere left to run. Julian, the game is over. I huddled against Julian, my hand over my belly. He found us. He tracked the boot, Julian realized, a look of self-hatred crossing his face. There was a tracker in the heel, too. I led him right to us. The door exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew everywhere. 3 mercenaries rushed in, guns drawn, laser sights dancing on our chests. Behind them, Doctor. Elias Thorne stepped into the room. He was wearing a thick fur coat, looking untouched by the cold, untouched by the chaos. He held a clipboard in one hand and a scalpel in the other. He looked at us, two shivering, broken people huddled in the dust, and he smiled. It was the smile of the devil himself. "You caused me a lot of trouble tonight, Elise," he said, stepping closer. "And you cost me a very expensive nurse." He kicked the dead satellite phone out of Julian's hand. "Tie them up," Thorne ordered the men. They grabbed us, separating us. I screamed as they dragged me to the dusty table in the center of the room. They slammed me down onto it, pinning my arms and legs. "Get off her!" Julian roared, struggling against two men who were forcing him to his knees. "Don't touch her!" Thorne walked over to me. He ripped open the front of my torn robe, exposing my pregnant belly to the freezing air. I sobbed, thrashing against the men holding me, but I was powerless. Thorne leaned down, the scalpel gleaming in the flashlight beam. He placed the cold steel tip against my skin, right above my navel. "The helicopter is 5 minutes out," Thorne said to Julian, his voice calm and conversational. "I have the transfer papers right here on this clipboard. You sign them, assigning 50% of Vance Tech to my shell corporation, and I let you walk away. You refuse." He pressed the scalpel down slightly. I felt a sharp sting. A drop of blood welled up. "And I perform the C-section right here," Thorne whispered. "Without anesthesia. I will take the baby, and I will leave your wife to bleed out on this table." "You are insane!" Julian shouted, tears streaming down his face. "I will sign. Give me the pen. I will sign it all." "I thought you might," Thorne grinned. He walked over to Julian, holding out the clipboard and a pen. "Sign, and make it legible. My bankers are very particular." I lay on the table, the cold wood biting into my back, watching my husband sign away his legacy to save my life. I looked at the ceiling of the shack, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. "Please, Marcus, please be fast," because once that paper was signed, I knew Thorne had no intention of letting any of us live. We were loose ends. And Doctor. Thorne was a man who tidied up. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room, louder to my ears than the howling wind outside. Julian signed his name with a shaking hand, surrendering half of his birthright to the monster standing over us. He dropped the pen, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "There," Julian rasped, looking up at Doctor. Thorne with eyes full of broken glass. "You have what you want. Now let her go." Thorne picked up the clipboard, inspecting the signature with the scrutiny of a jeweler examining a diamond. He smiled, a slow, predatory curling of his lips that did not reach his cold eyes. "Excellent," Thorne said. "This will do nicely." He handed the clipboard to one of his mercenaries. "Upload the digital copy to the server in the Cayman Islands immediately. I want confirmation of the transfer within 10 minutes. We are leaving," Julian said, trying to stand, but a guard kicked him behind the knees, forcing him back down. "You promised. We had a deal." "I promised I would not perform a C-section on this table," Thorne corrected him, his voice smooth as silk. "I did not promise you would leave this mountain alive. You see, Julian, loose ends are such messy things. And you are a very loose end." "You liar!" I screamed, struggling against the ropes that bound my wrists behind my back. They had tied me to a heavy wooden chair after hauling me off the table. "You are going to kill us anyway." "Patience, Elise," Thorne said, checking his watch. A Patek Philippe that cost more than the shack we were dying in. "We are waiting for one final witness. It seems only fitting that the whole family be present for the finale." A low thrumming sound began to vibrate through the floorboards. It grew louder, a rhythmic thwup, thwup, thwup that shook dust from the rafters. Another helicopter. "Ah," Thorne said, adjusting his fur coat. "Right on time." The noise became deafening, drowning out the wind. The helicopter was landing in the clearing just outside the shack. The mercenaries adjusted their grip on their rifles, looking nervous. Thorne, however, looked like he was hosting a gala. The door to the shack, already hanging off its hinges, was pushed open. A gust of snow swirled in, followed by a figure wrapped in a white mink coat that seemed to glow in the gloom. Victoria Vance stepped into the ruin of the ranger station. She looked impeccable. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless, her boots polished. She looked around the dirty, blood-stained room with a curl of distaste, as if she had stepped into a sewer. Then, her eyes landed on Julian. She froze. Her hand went to her throat, clutching her pearl necklace. "Julian," she whispered. "Hello, Mother," Julian said. His voice was dead. No anger, no sadness, just a void. Victoria took a step forward, her eyes tearing up. "Oh, thank God. You are awake. You look terrible." "I have been in a chemical coma for 3 weeks," Julian said. "And before that, I was blown up, but I suppose that was the plan. Was it not?" Victoria flinched. She looked at Thorne, her expression hardening. "You told me he was still under... You told me you needed me here to verify his identity for the biometric transfer." "I lied," Thorne said casually, leaning against the wall. "I do that. Why is she here?" Victoria pointed a gloved finger at me. "I paid you to get rid of her. I paid you to make sure that mistake never saw the light of day." "Elise is here because she is useful," Thorne said. "Unlike you, Victoria, who is becoming rapidly obsolete." "How dare you?" Victoria hissed, drawing herself up to her full height. She turned back to Julian, her voice shifting into a pleading, manipulative tone I knew too well. "Julian, you must listen to me. I did this for us, for the family. You were going to destroy everything your father built with your ridiculous ethics. You were going to expose the offshore accounts. I had to stop you. I had to protect the legacy." "You tried to kill me," Julian said, staring at her with pure revulsion. "No," Victoria cried. "Never. I told them to get you off the boat. It was supposed to be a disappearance, a lesson. I wanted to keep you safe here until you came to your senses. Until you forgot about her." She glared at me with pure venom. "She is the poison. Julian, she turned you against me. She is a gold digger who polluted our bloodline." "She is my wife," Julian spat, struggling against his bonds. "And she is carrying your granddaughter. But you do not have a granddaughter. You do not have a son. You have nothing." "I have the company," Victoria shrieked, losing her composure. "I have everything." "Actually," Thorne interrupted, stepping between them. "About that," he held up the clipboard. "Julian just signed over 50% of his voting shares. But not to you, Victoria, to me." Victoria went still. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. "What?" "You see," Thorne continued, pacing the room like a lecturer. "Blackmailing one Vance is profitable, but playing two against each other? That is an empire. I have the shares. I control the board now. And you, my dear Victoria, are going to transfer the remaining liquid assets in the family trust to my account in Zurich, right now." "You are insane," Victoria whispered. "I will not give you a dime. I will call the police. I will tell them you kidnapped my son." "Will you?" Thorne laughed. He pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "I don't care how you do it, doctor. Just make sure Julian stays asleep, and the girl if the abortion fails. Make it look like an accident. I want them gone." The recording stopped. Victoria staggered back, hitting the wall. "I have copies," Thorne said. "I have the emails. I have the bank transfers where you paid for the accident on the yacht. If you do not do exactly what I say, I send this to the FBI, to the press, to everyone. You will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison, known as the woman who put a hit on her own child." Victoria looked at Thorne, then at Julian. She crumbled. The Steel Lady, the Queen of Chicago, dissolved into a terrified old woman. "Please," she sobbed, falling to her knees in the dirt. "Please don't. I will give you the money. Take it all. Just let us go." "Let us go?" Thorne mocked. Suddenly it is us? A minute ago you wanted Elise dead. She is carrying the air, Victoria wept, looking at my stomach with a twisted mixture of greed and regret. If you take the money, I need the air. Please, don't hurt Julian. He is all I have. It was a pathetic, distorted display of motherly love, warped by narcissism, but it was real, in her own sick way. She loved him. She just loved power more. I am afraid it is too late for negotiations. Thorne sighed. I have the shares. I don't need the money anymore. And frankly, you are all too much trouble to keep alive. He raised his gun, aiming it directly at Victoria's head. Goodbye, Victoria. No! The scream came from Julian. With a surge of adrenaline fueled by pure instinct, Julian threw himself forward. He was still tied, but he launched his body like a battering ram. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the small space. Victoria screamed, covering her head, but she did not fall. Julian fell. He hit the floor hard. Groaning, a dark stain began to spread rapidly across the shoulder of his hospital gown. Julian! I screamed, the sound tearing my throat. Thorne looked down at Julian, annoyed. Noble, stupid, but noble. You took a bullet for the woman who sold you to a cartel. How poetic. He racked the slide of his pistol. Now, where were we? The mercenaries were watching the drama, distracted by the sudden violence. They had lowered their weapons slightly. This was it. My hands were sweaty and slick behind my back, when they had dragged me onto the table earlier to threaten the C-section. My fingers had brushed against something sharp stuck in the wood, a jagged shard of glass from the window explosion. I had managed to palm it. For the last 5 minutes, while they argued, I had been sawing at the thick zip tie around my wrists. I felt the plastic give way. Snap. My hands were free. Thorne turned his gun back toward Victoria. I lunged. I didn't go for the gun. I was too far away. I went for the only weapon I could reach, the expensive silver ballpoint pen Julian had used to sign the papers, which was still sitting on the edge of the table. I grabbed it in my fist like a dagger. Thorne! I shrieked. He turned toward me, his eyes widening in surprise. I drove the pen into his thigh with every ounce of hatred I possessed. I aimed for the femoral artery, just like I had read in my crime novels. Thorne howled. It was a sound of pure shock and pain. He dropped the gun, clutching his leg. The pen was buried deep in the muscle. You bitch! He roared, backhanding me across the face. I flew backward, crashing into the wall. But I had done my job. The gun was on the floor. Get the gun! I yelled at Victoria. Victoria Vance, the socialite who had never lifted anything heavier than a champagne glass, stared at the pistol. Then she looked at her bleeding son. A switch flipped in her eyes. She scrambled for the weapon. Kill them! Thorne shouted at his men, blood pouring through his fingers. The mercenaries raised their rifles. But before they could fire, a thunderous noise shook the world. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't Thorne's helicopter. It was the roar of a heavy military transport. A bright light, brighter than the sun, flooded the shack from above, shining through the shattered roof. This is the FBI! A voice boomed from the sky, magnified by a PA system. Drop your weapons. We have you surrounded. Thorne looked up, his face twisting into a mask of pure fury. Marcus, he spat. Breach! Breach! The mercenaries shouted. Flashbang grenades crashed through the windows. Boom! Boom! The room erupted in blinding white light and a concussive sound that knocked the wind out of everyone. I curled into a ball, covering my ears. When my vision cleared, the door was gone. Men in full tactical gear with FBI emblazoned on their chests were pouring into the room like a black tide. Federal agents! Get down! Get down! The mercenaries didn't surrender. They were paid to fight. Gunfire erupted. Short, controlled bursts from the FBI agents. Chaotic sprays from the mercenaries. I saw Julian crawling toward me, dragging his wounded shoulder. Elise! I am here! I cried, reaching for him, Victoria was huddled in the corner, firing Thorn's pistol wildly at the ceiling, screaming. But Thorn was not done. He was injured. He was cornered. But he was a survivor. He saw the tide turning. He saw that he couldn't fight the FBI. He needed a shield. He saw me. I was crawling toward Julian. Thorn lunged, moving faster than a wounded man should. He grabbed me by my hair, yanking me back. "No!" Julian screamed, trying to grab my leg. But his strength failed him. Thorn hauled me up, wrapping his arm around my neck in a chokehold. He pressed a long, serrated survival knife, drawn from his boot, against my throat. "Back off," Thorn screamed, his voice raw. "Back off, or I slice her open right here." The gunfire stopped instantly. The room went deadly silent. 5 FBI agents had their rifles trained on Thorn's head, but they couldn't take the shot. He was using me as a human shield, his body completely hidden behind mine. The knife was digging into the soft skin of my neck. I could feel the blood trickling down. "Drop the weapon!" a tall agent at the front shouted. It was Marcus. I recognized the voice from the phone call. "I am walking out of here," Thorn panted, his breath hot and fetid in my ear. "I am getting on that chopper, and she is coming with me. Anyone follows, she dies. Anyone shoots, she dies." He began to drag me backward, toward the gaping hole where the back wall used to be. Beyond that hole was the ridge, the cliff, a 500-foot drop into the darkness. "Don't do it, Thorn," Marcus warned, stepping forward. "There is nowhere to go." "There is always somewhere to go," Thorn sneered. He dragged me out into the snow. The wind hit us like a hammer. The FBI agents followed, guns raised, moving in a semicircle. We reached the edge of the precipice. Behind us was the void. Below us, the jagged rocks and the frozen river. Thorn stopped. He held me tight against him, the knife pressing harder. "Pilot!" Thorn yelled into his radio headset. "Lift off! Lower the winch! Now!" His helicopter, which had been idling, began to rise, hovering over the cliff edge. A cable began to descend. "You are not taking her!" Julian's voice cut through the wind. He had stumbled out of the shack. He was leaning against the doorframe, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His face gray as ash, but he was standing. "Go back to sleep, Julian," Thorn laughed maniacally. "You signed the papers. You lost. I win. I get the money. I get the girl. And I get to watch you suffer." "Let her go," Julian said. Taking a step forward, he looked unarmed, broken, defeated. "Or what?" Thorn taunted. "You will bleed on me?" I looked at Julian. I saw his eyes. They weren't looking at Thorn. They were looking at me. And then they flicked down to his feet, to the snow. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I remembered the training. I remembered what the self-defense instructor had told me years ago in a class I took for fun. If they take you to a secondary location, you are dead. Fight. Fight with everything you have. I felt the vibration of the helicopter above us. The winch cable was dangling just a few feet away. Thorn reached out one hand to grab it, momentarily loosening his grip on my neck. It was now or never. "Julian!" I screamed. I didn't pull away. I slammed my head backward, smashing my skull into Thorn's nose. It was a sickening crunch. Thorn roared, his head snapping back, blood blinding him for a split second. The knife slipped from my throat. I dropped my weight, spinning around. I didn't run. I drove my knee into the wound in his thigh, the same spot I had stabbed with the pen. Thorn screamed, his leg buckling. He released me, stumbling backward toward the edge. "Shoot him!" Marcus yelled. A single shot rang out. It hit Thorn in the shoulder, spinning him around. He flailed, his arms grasping at the air, his boots slipping on the icy rock. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were wide with disbelief. And then, he was gone. He fell silently into the abyss, swallowed by the darkness and the snow. I collapsed onto my knees near the edge, gasping for air, clutching my neck. Elise! Julian was there. He fell into the snow beside me, wrapping his good arm around me. We clung to each other. Two broken people on the edge of the world, while the FBI agents swarmed around us, securing the perimeter. "It is over," Julian sobbed into my hair. "It is over." I looked up. The helicopter that had been waiting for Thorn banked sharply and fled into the night, chased by the FBI choppers. I looked back at the shack. Victoria Vance was being led out in handcuffs. She looked old, defeated. She looked at us, opening her mouth to speak, but an agent pushed her forward. Julian didn't even look at her. He buried his face in my neck. "I got you. I got you." I closed my eyes, feeling the cold snow against my skin and the warm, steady beat of my husband's heart against my chest. And inside me, a tiny, furious kick. Hope was alive. We were alive, and the nightmare was finally, truly over. The wind on the edge of the cliff was not just a weather phenomenon. It was a living, screaming entity that sought to tear us from the face of the mountain. I was dangling over the abyss, my feet scraping against the icy rocks, held up only by the arm of a madman wrapped around my throat. Below us, a drop of 500 feet into the frozen gorge awaited. The roar of the FBI helicopter overhead was deafening, its spotlight pinning us against the snow like insects on a slide. "Back off." "Doctor," Thorn screamed, his voice shredding through the gale. He pressed the knife harder into my skin, and I felt a warm trickle of blood run down my neck, freezing instantly in the sub-zero air. "Tell the pilot to back off, or she flies." Marcus, the FBI agent, stood 10 yards away, his weapon trained on Thorn's head. But he was helpless. The angle was impossible. Thorn was using my body as a shield, burying his face behind my hair. "There is nowhere to go, Elias," Marcus bellowed over the megaphone. "The airspace is locked down. Put the knife down." "I do not need airspace," Thorn yelled, his eyes darting frantically between the agents and the hovering helicopter he had summoned. "I just need a hostage. Lower the winch. Now." I gasped for air, clawing at his arm, but his grip was iron. The pain in my neck was sharp, but the terror was a dull, heavy weight in my stomach. I looked at Julian. My husband was standing near the door of the shattered shack. He was bleeding from the gunshot wound in his shoulder, his hospital gown stained crimson. He looked like a ghost, shivering violently in the wind, barely able to stand, but his eyes were locked on mine. They were burning with a desperation that defied the cold. Julian took a step forward, then another. He was walking into the line of fire. "Stay back!" Thorn shrieked, swinging me around so my heels slipped over the edge. I screamed, pebbles cascading down into the darkness below. "Let her go!" "Thorn!" Julian shouted. His voice was not loud, but it carried a strange, eerie calm that cut through the chaos. "You want the money? You want the company? It is yours." Thorn paused. The greed that had driven him to kidnap, to torture, to murder, it flickered in his eyes even now, on the brink of death. "I already have the signature," Thorn spat. "You have a signature obtained under duress," Julian countered, stepping closer, his hands raised in surrender. "It will be contested. The courts will freeze the assets for years. You will never see a dime. But if you let her go, if you walk away, I will ratify it. I will record a video statement right now, in front of these agents. I will give you everything. Valid, irrevocable. Billions of dollars, Elias. All for you." It was a lie. We both knew it. But it was a lie wrapped in the one thing Thorn could not resist: absolute power. Thorn hesitated. For 1 second, one fatal second, his mind calculated the odds. He looked at the helicopter winch swaying in the wind, then at Julian, then at the vast empire he could buy with that money. His grip on my neck loosened, just a fraction of an inch, in that microsecond of hesitation. Time seemed to stop. I looked at Julian, and I saw the boy I had met in the botanical garden. I saw the father of my child. I saw the man who had taken a bullet for a mother who hated him. And then, I looked inside myself. I saw the woman who had been thrown out into the snow with $100. I saw the widow who had slept in a homeless shelter. I saw the pregnant mother who had been told to get rid of it. I was not a bargaining chip. I was not a victim. I was Elise Marquette Vance. And I was done bleeding for these people. Rage, hot and blinding, exploded in my chest. I remembered the wound, the deep puncture in Thorne's thigh where I had stabbed him with the pen moments ago in the shack. I didn't try to run. I didn't try to pull away. Instead, I drove my right elbow backward with every ounce of hysterical strength I possessed. I aimed blindly, but my rage guided me true. My elbow connected squarely with the open, bleeding wound on his leg. Thorne howled. It was a sound of animal agony that eclipsed the roar of the rotors. His leg buckled instantly. His arm flew wide, the knife falling from his grasp and tumbling into the snow. "You bitch!" he screamed. Grabbing at me blindly, he shoved me. Hard. I lost my footing. The icy rock beneath my boots gave way. I fell backward, the world tilting into a kaleidoscope of black sky and white snow. "Elise!" Julian's scream was the last thing I heard as I went over the edge. I didn't fall 500 feet. I fell 6 feet. My hands flailed desperately, clawing at the frozen earth. My fingers smashed against rock, tearing the skin, until they hooked around a gnarled pine root protruding from the cliff face. I slammed into the rock wall, the breath knocked out of me. I was dangling over the void, gripping the icy wood with freezing fingers. My feet kicked at empty air. Above me, on the ledge, Thorne had regained his balance. He looked down at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He didn't look like a doctor anymore. He looked like a demon unmasked. "Die," he hissed. He raised his heavy boot, aiming to stomp on my fingers and send me into the darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut. I thought of my baby. "I am sorry. Hope, I am so sorry." Crack. It wasn't the sound of a bone breaking. It was the sharp, dry crack of a sniper rifle. A mist of red bloomed in the air above me. Thorne's boot never came down. Marcus, the FBI agent, had taken the shot. From 20 yards away, in high winds, he had fired a single bullet. It didn't kill Thorne. It struck the hand he was using to steady himself on the rock face, the hand holding onto the safety of the ledge. The bullet shattered his wrist. Thorne lost his anchor. His momentum, combined with the slick ice in his injured leg, did the rest. He tipped backward. I opened my eyes just in time to see him fall past me. He didn't scream. He just looked surprised. He tumbled into the gloom, a dark shape spinning smaller and smaller until the shadows swallowed him whole. Silence. For a heartbeat. There was only the wind. Then, hands were grabbing my wrists. Strong, frantic hands. "I have her! I have her!" It was Julian. He was lying flat on his stomach on the edge of the cliff, reaching down, ignoring his own bleeding shoulder. 2 FBI agents were holding his legs to keep him from sliding over. "Pull!" Julian grunted, his face red with exertion, tears streaming down his cheeks. I kicked my feet, finding purchase on a small outcropping, and pushed upward. They hauled me over the ledge, dragging me through the snow away from the abyss. I collapsed onto the frozen ground, gasping, shaking so hard my teeth rattled. Julian crawled over to me. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his good arm around me and buried his face in my chest. He was sobbing. Great, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. I wrapped my arms around his neck, smelling the blood and the sweat and the pine, and I cried with him. We lay there in the snow, a tangle of broken limbs and beating hearts. Alive. We were alive. "Clear!" Marcus shouted, his voice sounding distant. "Subject down! Secure the scene!" Paramedics were swarming us now, wrapping us in thermal blankets, checking our vitals. But I wouldn't let go of Julian. I couldn't. "Mrs. Vance?" a medic said gently, trying to check my neck. We need to stop the bleeding. I am fine, I whispered, though my voice was a wreck. Just don't separate us. They helped us stand. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion. As we were led back toward the clearing, past the ruins of the shack, I saw her, Victoria Vance. She was standing near the landing skids of the FBI helicopter. Her white mink coat was muddy and stained with Julian's blood. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. 2 agents stood on either side of her. She looked small, the giant, terrifying matriarch who had ruled Chicago society, who had terrorized me, who had ordered the death of her own son. She had shrunk. Her face was pale, stripped of its arrogance. When she saw us approaching, she stepped forward, straining against the cuffs. "Julian," she croaked. Her voice was trembling. "Julian, please." Julian stopped. He motioned for the medics to wait. He looked at his mother. His face was unreadable. It wasn't angry anymore. It was just tired. "I didn't know he would go this far," Victoria stammered, tears leaking from her eyes. "I never wanted you dead. You have to believe me. I did it for the legacy, for your father." "My father," Julian said quietly, "would have been ashamed of you." Victoria flinched as if he had slapped her. "I can fix this," she pleaded, desperation creeping back into her tone. "I have the best lawyers. We can say it was coercion. We can say Thorne forced me. Julian, I am your mother. You cannot let them take me to prison." She looked at me then. For the first time, her eyes didn't hold hatred. They held fear, and something else, a silent plea for mercy. "Elise," she whispered, tell him family comes first." I looked at this woman who had thrown $100 at me in a blizzard, who had told me to kill my child, who had called me a mistake to be erased. I felt nothing, no triumph, no anger, just a profound, hollow pity. I didn't answer her. I just leaned closer to Julian. Julian looked at his mother for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of manipulation and pain. "You are right," Julian said softly. "Family comes first." Victoria's face lit up with a flicker of hope. "And my family," Julian continued, his voice hardening into steel, "is standing right here, my wife and my daughter." He tightened his grip on my waist. "You?" Julian shook his head slowly. "You died to me the night you closed that door on Elise. I buried you that day. Mother, the woman standing here, I do not know who she is." "Julian!" Victoria screamed, pulling against the agents. "You ungrateful wretch! I made you! I own you!" "Get her out of here," Marcus ordered. The agents shoved Victoria toward the helicopter. She was screaming now, hurling curses, her mask of civility completely shattered. We watched as they loaded her in. She looked through the window one last time, her face twisted in a silent scream, before the helicopter lifted off, carrying the last of the Vance corruption away into the night. I watched it go, feeling a weight lift off my soul that I hadn't realized I was carrying. "It is done," Julian whispered, kissing the top of my head. "Yes," I breathed. "It is." Suddenly, a sharp pain tore through my abdomen. I gasped, doubling over, clutching my stomach. This wasn't a cramp. This was a vice grip tightening around my insides. "Elise?" Julian's panic was instant. "What is it? Did he hurt you?" Another wave hit me. Stronger this time. I felt a gush of warm fluid soak my legs, steaming in the cold air. "The baby," I gasped, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "My water, Julian. The baby is coming." "Now?" Julian shouted, looking around wildly. "She is only 6 months along." "The fall," a medic said, rushing over. "The trauma. She is going into premature labor. We need to get her to a hospital immediately. The NICU unit at St. Luke's is the only one equipped for this." "Get the other chopper," Marcus yelled into his radio. "We have a medical emergency, priority 1. They lifted me onto a stretcher. The pain was blinding now, coming in waves that left me breathless. "Don't let me lose her," I grabbed the medic's jacket. Please, not after all this. Don't let me lose her. We are going to do everything we can, the medic promised. Strapping me in, Julian tried to climb in with me, but he stumbled, his face gray. He had lost too much blood. Sir, you need the other transport, a medic said, holding him back. You need surgery. I am not leaving her, Julian roared, fighting them. I am not leaving my wife. Let him in, I screamed through the pain. Let him in. Marcus stepped in. Put him in the jump seat. Hook him up to an IV. Move. They shoved Julian into the helicopter next to me. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was solid. The rotors spun up, whipping the snow into a frenzy. As we lifted off the mountain, rising above the trees, above the shack, above the cliff where Thorn had fallen. I looked out the window. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, a thin, pale line of gold breaking the darkness of the night. I squeezed Julian's hand. The contractions were tearing me apart, but as I looked at that sunrise, I knew. We had walked through the valley of the shadow of death. We had burned down hell, and now we were flying toward the light. Hang on. Hope, I whispered to the life fighting inside me. Just hang on. We are going home. The gavel struck the mahogany sound block, and the noise echoed through the crowded courtroom like the final thunderclap of a long, weary storm. 3 months had passed since the nightmare on the mountain. But the world was only just beginning to wake up to the full extent of the horror. The trial of the United States versus Victoria Vance and the remnants of the Elias Thorne Syndicate had become the media event of the decade. People camped out on the steps of the courthouse in downtown Chicago, holding signs, debating the nature of greed and motherhood. I sat in the front row, clutching Julian's hand. His grip was warm and solid, a stark contrast to the cold, trembling hand I had held in the snow that night. Victoria stood at the defense table. She was no longer the queen of Chicago society. The white mink coat was gone, replaced by a drab prison uniform that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, once dyed and sprayed into submission, was growing out gray and brittle. She looked small. She looked human. Victoria Vance, the judge said, peering over his spectacles, for the charges of conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, embezzlement, and money laundering. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs popped like strobes. But amidst the chaos, Victoria turned. She did not look at the cameras. She did not look at her lawyers. She looked at us. Her eyes searched Julian's face for a flicker of sympathy, a crack in the armor where the son she had raised might still exist. But Julian sat like a statue carved from granite. He did not look away, but his gaze was empty. He had mourned his mother on the mountain, and there were no tears left to shed. As the bailiffs led her away, the chains around her ankles clinking a mournful rhythm, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not joy. It was not triumph. It was simply the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted from my chest, allowing me to take a full, deep breath for the first time in months. The empire of Vance Tech did not escape unscathed. The revelation that its matriarch had been funding a black market kidnapping ring sent the stock plummeting. The board of directors, terrified of the fallout, had tried to oust Julian, claiming the family name was toxic, but they had underestimated the man who had walked through hell to get back to his wife. Julian returned to the boardroom not as the heir, but as the survivor. He purged the company. He fired every executive who had been complicit in Victoria's schemes. He opened the books to the SEC and the public. He announced that Vance Tech would pivot its massive resources toward ethical medical technology and affordable housing solutions. It was a gamble that terrified the shareholders, but the public loved it. They loved the story of the prodigal son who burned down the corrupt kingdom to build something good. But the victory that mattered most to me did not happen in a boardroom or a courthouse. It happened in a quiet hospital room on the outskirts of the city. 2 weeks after the rescue, When I was finally allowed to travel, Julian and I went to visit Nora. We had thought she was dead when we ran into the woods that night, leaving her to lead the dogs away. I had carried the guilt of her sacrifice like a stone in my heart, but Marcus and the FBI team had been thorough. They found her in a ravine, badly mauled, suffering from hypothermia, but alive. She had fought. She had dragged herself into a hollow log and held on until the lights of the rescue team cut through the dark. When we walked into her room, she was sitting up, her leg encased in a heavy cast, reading a magazine. When she saw us, her face lit up, and she tried to adjust her pillows. "Stay still," I said, rushing over to hug her gently. "You are a hero. Nora, you saved us." "I just did what I had to do," she whispered, looking at Julian. "Is Toby okay?" "Toby is fine," Julian said. Stepping forward, he placed a folder on her bedside table. "I had my private security team extract him from that facility upstate the same night we were rescued. He is in a rehab center in Colorado, fully paid for, getting the best care in the country, and this," he tapped the folder, "is for you." Nora opened it. Her eyes went wide. It was an acceptance letter to the University of Chicago Medical School, along with a document confirming a full scholarship covering tuition, living expenses, and a stipend. "You have a gift, Nora," Julian said. "You kept me alive when Thorne tried to turn me into a vegetable. You saved my wife. The world needs real doctors, not monsters like Thorne. Go be a great one." Nora cried then, and for the first time, they were tears of happiness. Life, slowly but surely, began to bloom again, and the most beautiful bloom of all arrived on a rainy Tuesday in April. My labor had been stopped that night on the helicopter with emergency medication, buying us 7 critical weeks, when Hope finally decided to make her entrance. She did so with a loud, indignant cry that reassured every doctor in the room. She was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a tuft of black hair that matched Julian's. When they placed her on my chest, warm and wiggling, the last shadows of the fear I had felt in that clinic, when I was alone and starving, finally dissolved. She was not a burden. She was not a mistake. She was the victory. We did not go back to Blackwood Manor. The mansion stood on the hill like a haunted monument to a toxic past. Julian listed it for sale, donating the proceeds to the victims of Thorne's other operations. Instead, we drove 3 hours north to a plot of land overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a place I had found years ago, a dream I had tucked away in a sketchbook. "Build it," Julian had said, handing me a set of drafting pencils one morning while I was nursing Hope. "Build the home you always wanted," and I did. I designed a house that was the antithesis of Blackwood. No cold marble, no imposing columns, no gates. I used cedar wood that smelled of the forest, and floor-to-ceiling glass that let the light flood in from every angle. I designed a garden that wove through the structure, bringing the outside in, filled with the hydrangeas Julian had asked me about the day we met. It was not just a house for us, it became the headquarters for my new mission. I returned to architecture, but I no longer designed parks for the wealthy. I founded the Sanctuary Project, using the settlement money from the lawsuit against the estate. I began designing and building safe havens for pregnant women facing homelessness and abuse. I wanted to create places that offered dignity, not just shelter, places where no woman would ever have to hold $100 in the snow and wonder if she should end her child's life to survive. One evening in late July, the air was thick with the scent of pine and impending rain. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in strokes of violet and gold. I walked out onto the wide wooden deck of our new home. Julian was sitting in the rocking chair, holding Hope. She was 4 months old now, chubby and smiling, grabbing at his finger with a grip that promised she would be a fighter. I stood there for a moment, just watching them, the 2 loves of my life. Julian looked up and smiled. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for years was gone. The shadows under his eyes had vanished. He looked younger, lighter. I walked over and sat on the arm of his chair. leaning my head against his shoulder. He shifted so his arm could wrap around my waist. I looked down at his arm. The sleeve of his shirt was rolled up, exposing the scars. There was the old, jagged white line from his childhood. And near it, the fresh, pink puckered skin from the bullet wound he had taken for Victoria. I traced the new scar with my finger. "Does it still hurt?" I asked softly. "Only when it rains," Julian said, kissing my hand. "But it is a good reminder." "Of what?" "That we survived," he said, looking down at Hope, who was blowing bubbles at the sky, "and that the past cannot hurt us anymore unless we let it." I looked out at the lake, watching the waves lap gently against the shore. I thought about Victoria, sitting in a concrete cell, staring at a blank wall. I thought about Thorn, his body broken at the bottom of a ravine, his legacy of terror erased. They had money, they had power, they had armies of lawyers and mercenaries. They had everything the world said was necessary to win. But they didn't have this. They didn't have the warmth of a hand holding yours in the dark. They didn't have the sound of a baby laughing at the wind. They didn't have the peace that comes from knowing you didn't sell your soul to survive. "You know," I said, resting my cheek against Julian's hair, "I used to think revenge was about making them suffer. I wanted to burn Blackwood to the ground. I wanted to scream at her until she broke." "And now?" Julian asked. "Now," I said, watching the first fireflies of the evening blink into existence in the garden I had planted. I realized that would have kept me tied to them forever. The sweetest revenge isn't hurting them, Julian, it is being happy. It is living a life so full, so bright, and so beautiful that their darkness doesn't even cast a shadow on us anymore." Julian pulled me closer. Hope yawned, her little eyes drooping, safe and warm in her father's arms. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythm of the life we had built from the ashes. They tried to destroy us. They stripped us of our names, our money, and our dignity. They threw us into the snow and told us to die. They thought that because we were broken, we were finished, but they forgot the most fundamental rule of nature. They wanted to bury me, but they forgot that I was a seed. And that seed, after enduring the harshest winter, after being buried under the weight of their cruelty, did not rot. It grew. It pushed through the frozen earth, seeking the light. And now, as I looked at my husband and my daughter, I knew the truth. The storm had passed, and in its wake, we had not just survived. We had become a forest. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been an emotional journey with Elise and Julian, and I hope their resilience brought some warmth to your heart today. I am so curious to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening while cooking dinner, driving to work, or maybe relaxing before bed? Please let me know in the comments below. I would love to connect with you. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Sweet Rose Drama, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a little hope today.